Hello, hello. Welcome to week 3 of the You versus You Challenge speaker series. I'm Christian, your host for the evening. Um, it is such a joy and honor to get to introduce our speaker tonight. I met this guy about 10 years ago when I was in a rough spot and I needed a job. And he hired me and we got to work together for a while. And I was going through some really hard things, and I had no idea that he was going through some really hard things too at that same time that weren't all that different from mine. And when I thought it was as bad for me as it could possibly get, it wasn't until years later that I found out that he had it much worse. Little sneak peek right there.
Right.
So he is somebody who I admire. He is somebody who I consider a friend. When I think of my peers and the people that I relate to and that I connect with, he's at the top of my list. He is I'm not even going to go into his story because I know he's going to go into that and I can't do it justice. But he's actually not in Q. So for all you Q guys, this is a non-Q speaker. So it's something a little different. But I know his story and I know how powerful it is. And I know that he's got some incredibly important things to say about what we're doing right now. So with nothing else, I'm going to introduce you to Mr. Kelly Thrush.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me, guys. I do appreciate it. You know, like Christian, with all those kind words, we've known each other for quite some time now. So, and yes, both he and I were going through similar struggles when we met. Gosh, it has been 10 years ago now, I guess. So that's pretty amazing. But he asked me to come on and talk about some of the things because through my story, my journey over the last 5 years specifically or so, there's been a lot of life lessons that I've found work for me. And as I share this story, my story, and some of my struggles and so forth, some of those tools and those lessons that I've discovered and have been taught to me have resonated with other people, and they've worked for other folks in their version of my story. That's something I talk about often when I'm talking about my struggles, is that it's not unique. My version of it is, that's mine. But everybody has these types of things. So today we're talking about perspective and making sure your view of whatever task or challenge is right in front of you and how to kind of overcome that. So yeah, we'll talk about that and kind of go from there. So kind of where it all started was about halfway through that story. This is, that's me. Hard to believe when I look at these pictures. 5 years ago, almost exactly, just over 5 years ago, because of my drinking and because of my fatty foods and bar and restaurant life for a decade plus, in January of 2018, my liver said it quit. And it was pretty acute on January of that year. January 10th was actually the day that I got sent to the hospital by my boss because I was at work, but I was more yellow than that picture that you see there. And so this picture right here is hours after the ventilator was pulled out of my throat from a full liver transplant. This was, I don't know exactly, but I'm going to say probably 4 hours afterwards when I was finally starting to come to. And what this particular moment represents for me is really the change into who I am now versus who I was then. Because those first 10 seconds, and for lack of hyperbole, they were life-changing. When I woke up and I saw my family and friends standing around me in the ICU, and I'm hooked up to every machine that there is and the tubes down my throat, I had overwhelming sense of gratitude. I mean, it was, I'd made it to the other side. I couldn't believe it. I'm here. The day before, I wasn't supposed to make it. My body had crashed and I was quite literally dying. But somehow or another, at this point, it was a 14-hour surgery. And then this is about a day after that when I finally came to, when I woke up. The problem that I had in that particular moment was the guilt that was completely overwhelmed or intermingled with that gratitude. I couldn't have one emotion without the other, because it was my fault that I was there. I was the one who did this to me. I was the one who did this to all of my family and friends. So those first 10 seconds, and it's going to be kind of a theme as we go through, those 10-second breaks that you can give yourself, because those 10 seconds, in my case, these 10 seconds, they changed my life. And so I try to apply that same philosophy moving forward for other things that are going down the road. Because now there are things like rim to rim to rim at the Grand Canyon and ultra marathons and so forth and so on that have now come into my life. So kind of what we'll talk about those 10 seconds a little bit. Some extra pictures just to give you some context of what that day was like. The bruising has since gone, but that scar is still there. I mean, the staples aren't there anymore, but that's still there for sure. This next one, I put a warning slide on there because it is quite literally the liver that they took out of me and the liver that they put into me, to give you some context of what it was, where I was at that particular moment. Because prior to that, I quite literally was drinking myself to death. I had, right prior to transplant, I was drinking every day. I woke up with the shakes, and if I didn't drink, I would puke up bile. I mean, it was bad. I was in a bad way. It really got bad in 2017 because my marriage of, at that time, 16 years had dissolved. And when that happened, there was don't get me wrong, it had dissolved because of my drinking. It just got worse because of that. And I was in the wrong end of the bottle for about, a good 10 months, excuse me, in that particular year. And so this next slide, just to kind of give you an idea, and then we'll swing away from the transplant a little bit, but just give you an idea of where we were at. It's pretty easy to tell which one was which, and I won't leave it up there for very long. But finally, my liver had quit, and then it took my kidneys down. So I made it into the hospital at that point. Thank goodness, because the day I actually was in the hospital, the night before my transplant, my body had crashed. And the problem that I had leading up to that moment was, there's two big problems that I had. When you're a transplant recipient, there's two hurdles. Well, I had two hurdles that you had to overcome. One was you have to be the right amount of sick in order to get a transplant. Because if you're not sick enough, then you can wait. And other folks who do need that liver or that organ, they can take it. They take precedence. My problem that I had also on top of that was that I wasn't sober. And so why on earth would the doctors give me a chance with a brand new liver if I'm just going to turn around and ruin it in a year or two? And so what ended up happening in the hospital was there was two doctors that really put their reputation on the line for me, and convinced the transplant team to take a risk and put their reputation on the line for me, because the transplant team has metrics as well. I mean, they get graded on what candidates and how they recover and so forth and so on. So I was quite fortunate that day, because the night before, and you saw what shape my liver was in, the night before, when I was bleeding out, that was the problem. I was bleeding from anywhere that you could possibly bleed from. And to put it in perspective, I had 27 units of blood prior to the transplant. And a unit of blood is about 250 milliliters, give or take. So prior to the surgery, I had 7.75 liters of blood re-pumped into my body. And then it was a total of like 42 or something along those lines, total throughout the whole thing. So 10 liters of blood. You only have 40 something units of blood in your body at one point. So I recycled the entire thing. So coming out, that was the hard part. As difficult as it is for me to talk about, that the easy part was being sick. The easy part was going through transplant, as hard as it was. The hard part was, what am I going to do with it on the other side? And so it really started with that first word, that accountability. I had to have brutally honest conversations with myself coming out of that transplant, because I put myself here. I can blame everything you want to blame if you want to. It doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is I chose to drink and I chose to do those things. And And so I had to come to that realization. It had ruined just about every relationship I had within my life. The only ones that really had stuck around were one, my mom, who ironically or coincidentally, or go figure, also had her own alcohol issues that she was dealing with for years and years. And then my grandmother, because grandmas are grandmas, so they stick around. And then who is now my now wife. I had met her during 2017, and to put it bluntly, if I hadn't met her, I wouldn't be here. She absolutely saved my life. She was my advocate with the doctors. She was my advocate afterwards. Had I not met her and met Jamie, none of this is even possible. I wouldn't be talking here to you guys. So I think that's the first step when I talk about going through hard things and moving through whatever moment it might be, is you got to be honest with yourself. You can't BS yourself, because it doesn't do any good. You have to know where you stand, good, bad, and the ugly, but you got to be brutally honest with it. Kind of show you some other pictures. These are well before the transplant, back in my fatty food and bar days. Again, pretty hard to see that guy. This is shortly after transplant, these pictures right here. So the ones on the right, especially, the one where I'm holding that little donut pillow, I actually was released from the hospital that day. That's about a week after my surgery, but 8 hours from that picture, I was back in because I had an infection and had to get opened back up. Basically hosed out on the inside because I was going septic internally. So then I spent another month on top of that inside the hospital. So just to give you guys kind of an idea here. So moving forward through those types of things, when I talked about those other 10 seconds, I use them all the time. In this video right here, it will kind of show it. It's these 10 seconds kind of changed my life as well. So I had been getting better little by little physically, and we're going to talk about emotionally, the problem that was coming up here too. But physically, I had been getting better because part of the reason and my struggles when I got into the mess that I got into, it was my own fault. It was my own stubbornness that got me there in the first place. But that's also what kind of got me out as well. So, the bottom there, I talk about taking daunting tasks that are seemingly too big and breaking them up into manageable chunks. I got out of the hospital and I couldn't walk. I couldn't walk on my own. I had to use a walker for any short distances around the house, or I had to use a wheelchair for any length of distance at all. And so we had to break those into small little chunks. And so what I would do, I would stay at my grandma's house during the week. And so one of the goals that I had was, I'm just simply going to walk from the screen door to the mailbox and back with my walker, my little moo-moo, my house shoes on in the middle of June in Tucson, strolling back and forth. And that was my only goal for the day. And then eventually it got to be where I would go to the neighbor's house. And then I'd go to the end of the block. And then pretty soon I'd go all the way around the block. And it was taking those big tasks and breaking them into those small little chunks as I tried to regain some of my fitness that I had. And here, I don't know if I can easily show you because it won't let me use my mouse here. There we go. That was all I had that day. That was it. I had about 50 feet worth of running in me that particular day, which again is really kind of brings a smile to my face looking back at it, because that was pretty amazing. And the mental side of things, though, I was completely embarrassed of that video. I actually had told Jamie, who took that video, she needed to wait until there were no cars driving by because I didn't want anybody to see me in my awkward running that I was doing that particular day. Although if you listened in the background, there was a car that drove by. So, but that was the first steps really to that sort of journey. And so then what I ended up doing was I found personally that nature was the all healing aspect to all of this. And so this is one of my favorite quotes from Mary Davis that I had heard probably two or 3 years ago. A walk in nature walks the soul back home. And this is a picture that I took out in Madera Canyon, which is south of Tucson in the mountains, on one of my hikes. Because I would go disappear out there for not days, but for hours upon hours for an entire day and just disappear, because the problem that I was having in that particular aspect, my physical fitness was getting better, but my mental side of things, I was in a bad spot. I was probably in a worse spot mentally than I was prior to the surgery and the transplant. And the things that I was grappling with was, one, I have this brand new gift and this brand new lease on life, and I had no coping skills on how to do anything. I mean, I'm newly sober. I had no way of dealing with these just plain raw emotions that I had. So I had no way to deal with those things. And I found that if I went out in nature for however many hours I needed to be out in nature, it's just you and you. You're sitting alone with your own thoughts, and you can work through some of those things. But what I would do in these particular hikes is I'd go a little bit further each time. I look back on my very first hike in Madera Canyon, and it was a pretty easy one, although I was sore for a week. But it's a short little, probably 4-mile hike that I went up and out and back up this hill and then back. And then pretty soon now I'm hiking to the top of that same track, getting to the top throughout my journey there. So as we're recovering through, and the biggest thing was finding my purpose, because when we ended up getting divorced and I ended up getting this transplant and I ended up not drinking, which was a big part of my identity and who I was and who I associated myself with. I had to rediscover myself. So part of what I ended up doing was pushing myself beyond what I thought I could possibly do. Just a little bit more. Doesn't have to be a ton. We put together an event here in Tucson. There's a pretty famous landmark called Tumamoc Hill, and it's pretty steep. It's about 1.5 miles to the top. Christian knows it. I've seen him up there on Strava here the last 3 weeks. About 1.5 miles to the top and about 800 feet of elevation gain. So it's got some good 12 or 13% grades. But what we do with this event, and we do it every March, which is kind of the anniversary of my transplant, is we get as many people as we can. And my goal for me is I'm going to go up and down that thing 10 times. But usually there's no one crazy enough to do that. So what the point is to get everybody out there, and you just need to go a little bit more than you thought you could go. So just, if you think you can do it 2 times, do it 3. If you think you can do it once, do it twice. If you weren't going to do it at all, well, just show up and go to the start line, because peer pressure will talk you into it. Somebody will get you up and down that one. So pushing yourself beyond those limits, I think, is important. Redefining my relationship with suffering and redefining my relationship with pain. And I think this is really, really important when you're pushing through hard moments, whether it's with work or with physical fitness or whatever it might be. If you honestly and truly crave that suffering, it makes it not as bad, because you're looking forward to it. You know it's coming. You know when you're in a long race or you're heavy set at the gym or a long 100-mile century bike ride or whatever it is, you know the pain's coming. There's no way around it. So if you're looking forward to it and you are seriously, honestly craving that, it makes it a little bit easier to deal with once it finally gets there. So redefining those relationships when it comes to pain and suffering. The other one, when I talk about too, is redefining your relationships with your emotions, because one of the things that I will chat about with folks is there is a space between me and my emotions, or me and my pain set. They're not the same thing. My thoughts are not me. My emotions are not me. They're information that I can use, but I get to decide how there is. So there's a little bit of, I just call it a space, a little gap in between. And that also applies to just about everything, whether it's work, your relationship with your spouse, your significant other, your relationship with you when you're on a long run. This particular picture I'm pretty proud of. This was my first half marathon ever. It was actually my first race ever. And it was about 7 months after my transplant. My sister had caught wind that I was doing all this hiking, and I had sent her a photo at the top of one of the mountains that I was on. And she says, "Oh, you should run a half marathon with me next month." And I went, "You got to be crazy." And sure enough, there we are coming down Mount Lemon one day, which was pretty neat. Some of the other ones that I've done over the years, these are early days after transplant, but these are all ones that I kind of did on my own. The one on the left is at the top of what's called Kaiser Pass out in California. The one at the bottom is my very first unofficial marathon. I had only ran a half marathon prior to that. About a year before, I had ran a few half marathons. And that particular day, I decided I was going to run 26.2. And that was one of the most difficult things I have done because I had never ran that far, even remotely in the past. But it was, again, one of those ones where I'm going to push a little bit further than what you thought you could do. And I was pretty confident I could get it done that day, but it was rough. That's for sure. It took a while. One of the things that I try and practice, that I actually just heard, I didn't realize I was doing it, but something that I do is try to think about your own death, if not daily, often. And when I talk about this with people, they kind of give me a funny look, because most people want to avoid it at all costs. They don't want to talk about it. Fortunately for me, it's part of my story. It's part of, I was facing it. I was hours away from not being here. So it is just something I can't help but talk about on a daily basis. Because I think what it does is it ends up putting things into perspective. If you look at your own death, and what it looks like and when it might be, and all of those types of things, because what it ends up doing is it does make you appreciate those little things. It makes you appreciate the chaos. It makes you appreciate the hard, because those things are perfect just the way they are. They make this moment in time the way that it should be. And so one of the things that I will preach with some of the people that I coach and I chat with is take 10 seconds. We can take it right now. Just take 10 seconds and appreciate where you're at. Appreciate that we're getting to hear with however many people are on right now with these 30 guys that are in this accountability fitness group, and appreciate. That's pretty amazing that you have these fellas that you never met before that are able to interact and support you in some of your own personal goals. That's a pretty cool thing to be a part of. And you can do that wherever you want. And personally, for me, what I try and do is I try to take those little things, because when I chat about this, a lot of people think about the Thanksgiving dinner table when mom says, all right, we're going to go around the table and everybody say what you are thankful for this past year. And most of the time it's your health or your kids or you got married, and those are great. Those are big pillars, that happen in people's lives. But I like to look at the little things. And the one story that always comes to mind was 3 years back, we were camping. And this is Jamie, by the way, in that picture. Jamie and I were camping in the middle of nowhere, Arizona. And I was sitting on the bed of my truck. There was a stream, some oak trees, and whatnot. And I'm just sitting there kind of listening to the quiet, listening to the wind, the babbling of the water. And this little oak tree or oak leaf, flutters down into the stream and washes down the way. And I watched that for about 15, 20 seconds and realized at that moment, I'm the only human in the history of humans that will ever get that particular moment. It was made for me. And you think about how many of those moments are there every day for each one of us, that you just have to notice them. That's all. And when you can look out and you can pick out those little things, you go back to those big hard things, they don't seem quite as bad. If you look forward to that suffering, but you can compare it to that particular moment, it's easy to get through at that point. This little video, I think, sums it up. This is a lady named Caroline Mace is her name. And she is a public speaker and whatnot, but this video is one of my favorites. So I figured we'd end on this one because it kind of sums up much more eloquently than me, kind of what this whole thing is.
And then hold in your heart this prayer. This day of my life will never come again. I will never see the people I am looking at again. I will never see the sunrise again, and I will never see that sunset. I will never see the person having breakfast with me again. Just this way. Now, nothing in my life like this will ever come again. That alone, that choice alone, should take out of your heart every bitter taste there is. That it should shape the life around you with such grace and such beauty. That it make you only want to see the present with great gratitude and love. Thank you, everybody.
So I figured that's a good way to end it, because that particular speech or that particular clip defines what I've been trying to get across. Because if you can take those things that she mentioned and those things that I mentioned and really truly appreciate them. When you're standing at a 100-mile marathon or a 100-mile ultra marathon or a 50-mile, or it could be the local 5K, who cares? And that pain and that suffering and that moment that I want to quit comes up, and it ain't that bad. That's what I got, guys.
Oh my God, Kelly, thank you so much. Guys, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I do. We've got a couple minutes if anybody wants to jump in with questions, but otherwise, thank you guys. Kelly, I can't thank you enough for just going through what you went through and being here and being the man that you are today, because it's something special.
I appreciate it, brother.
Shameless plug for Kelly. His Instagram is, actually put it in the chat. It's just_keep_going.
Yep.
Or you can just reach out to me and I'll make sure that you get it. And Kelly, what are you fundraising for Rim to Rim to Rim?
Oh, I got 3 major ones that we're doing, but yeah, so there's I've got 3 major fundraising jobs that I've got going right now. So the one is Rim to Rim. There's a local teen center here in Arizona. It's up in Prescott, called the Launch Pad, and it takes underserved youths, for local youths, that wouldn't have an opportunity to get outdoors, and helps provide scholarships for them. So they get to go places like the Grand Canyon or whitewater rafting, or anything of that nature. So that's one of them. And so every year in October, we do Rim to Rim, or last year we did Rim to Rim to Rim last year, and raised money for these folks. These kids. Last year we ended up doing $74,000 that we raised, or something along those lines, which provided all the equipment, all the funding for these kids to go on treks. The other one, I'm challenge chair for the American Liver Foundation for the Tour de Tucson. So we're putting together a team. Christian, you've already been recruited. In case I haven't told you officially. But we're going to do the Tour de Tucson coming up in November. So we're raising money for the American Liver Foundation that helps with research. It helps with all sorts of different things that they do. I mean, that's a huge national organization. So they do, I mean, they do a lot of good work when it comes to liver health in general. So that's one. And the other one I do is called Movement for Recovery. This one's through Charlie Engle. If anybody is familiar with him, he's an ultra runner. I have the privilege of calling him one of my friends. So last year we went out to Maryland to celebrate his 30th year of sobriety. And there's called Ashley Treatment Center in right on the Chesapeake Bay. It's absolutely gorgeous, this campus. And so we moved for 30 hours last year. There was a bunch of us. Some ran, we walked, we did both, but the whole goal was that you keep on moving that whole time. And so we're raising money for substance abuse disorder research and how to help folks with addictions and recovery and so forth and so on. So all of those through my Instagram, I have a link tree on there. Find each one of those if you want to take a look, and some of the other fun articles and my time with Charlie and time at the bottom of the canyon, or running in the David Clark 100-mile race, the American Heroes run last year that I DNF'd. I only got 82, but that's all right. Lots of good stuff.
I'm just disappointed you never mentioned that I actually got you to do a triathlon.
You did, and I had a blast. It was a lot of, actually, Christian, you got me into a lot of this stuff. I mean, I had the idea anyway, but I went to pick your brain because you were already in on it. So Jamie really blames you more than anybody else to run these stupid events.
That explains a lot. All right, guys. Well, thank you all very much. Next week, flyer will go up soon. Mr. Ben Bristow is going to be our speaker. It is going to be about the Warriors ethos. I have no idea what he has in store, but I have no doubt that it will be good and you'll feel like you were punished. Oh, there you go. There's a question for you, Cal.
Didn't see it.
Book recommendations.
Where was it? I missed it.
Oh, book recommendations.
Oh gosh. Most recent or of all time? Because most recently I just read The Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter, I think is how you say his last name. I read that a couple weeks back, and that one had a big impact on me. I was thoroughly impressed with that one, and it talks about a lot of the stuff that I talked about today, which is why I related to it as much. Charlie Engel's book, The Running Man, which is really what got me into all of this, because it talks about his journey and his crazy addictions stories that went on, and how he got to run the Sahara and all the different projects that he works with. So that's a big one that I really liked. The other one that I got into too was David Clark, who has since passed. He's no longer alive and with us, but he had 2 books. One is called Out There. That's his first book, and talks about his story, very similar to mine, minus the transplant, but going from, family man, but he was addicted to booze and pain pills, to go into ultra marathons. And then his second book, Broken Open, which I just about finished, talks about his treks through Badwater and all the other ultra marathons. But that was pretty cool. And getting to meet his family and describe to them the impact that he had on me, even though I never met the guy. That was a lot of fun. We got to do that last September and meet some of his family and friends. I texted with his mom on Mother's Day, which was pretty cool. So yeah, good stuff.
Cool.
Those are 3 or 4 good ones for you.
And I know all those books, so London, if you didn't write them down or anything, just hit me up. I'll get you all that information. I'm actually reading Comfort Crisis right now. It's really good.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it?
Yeah. All right, guys, thank you very much. I'm going to give you back the rest of your night. I appreciate you guys. Great job in the challenge so far. There will be another giveaway coming up in the next couple days, and we will talk to you next week.
All right. Appreciate it, guys.
Thank you, Kelly.
Take care.